Hello, and thank you for tuning into this Spark Talk, Social Sector Infrastructure for Equity and Well-Being. I'm Hannah Martin, a policy analyst in the Urban Institute's Center on Nonprofits and Philanthropy, and I'm joined today by Kathy Ko Chin, CEO of Jasper Inclusion Advisors. Kathy and I are part of a team that studied the social sector infrastructure, which we define as the support system that helps the social sector thrive. It is an ecosystem of providers that offer services focused on sustainability, learning, relationships, and influence to social sector organizations, groups, and individuals. Currently, the social sector faces challenges related to equity and well-being, and especially needs infrastructure support in these areas. When offering this support, infrastructure providers can play three roles. They can play a serving role by meeting the current needs articulated by social sector organizations. They can play a leading role by pushing social sector organizations in what they see as the most beneficial direction. And they can play a bridging role by cultivating relationships across differences. Many infrastructure providers play more than one role, depending on their goals. Today, Kathy and I are going to talk about the roles that infrastructure providers can play when helping the social sector toward greater equity and well-being. So let's get started with our conversation. Kathy, what opportunities do you see for infrastructure providers to lead the social sector toward greater equity?
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you so much for including me on this Spark Talk. And I'm so glad that we're doing it for Change Philanthropy, which has really been pushing for equity within the field of philanthropy. So it's especially rewarding to address this audience. One benefit of infrastructure providers, of which I am one, is that we get to see a broad swath of the sector through our work. This means that we can start to identify patterns in the field that need addressing. There are often problems that are endemic to all social sector organizations, or many of them, so that you can articulate that it's not just one organization, individual organization's problem, but really something that's happening across the field. And it's important to identify and to articulate what those are. We know that from our infrastructure research and the research that others in the field have done, is that there's inequities in historic funding patterns between organizations that are led by and for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color communities, as well as marginalized communities with respect to geographic location, language, disability, sexual orientation, and class. Infrastructure providers can help by offering services that explicitly meet the needs of these organizations and by advocating for funders to move money to these organizations.
Thank you. And why do you think it's important for infrastructure providers to play a leading role here? And are there times when they should instead play a serving or bridging role?
There's such a huge shift that's going on in our country, Hannah, and this includes in the social sector, in particular about our nation's racial reckoning. There's so many dimensions to this. Leadership by people of color for and with each of their communities is really needed, as well as work around healing for all of us as individuals, around our communities, and around the nation. So infrastructure providers can help provide support to these efforts rather than lead, but in particular can be connectors, like the bridging role that you spoke about earlier, across various players in the ecosystem. And we also need infrastructure providers from communities of color to assure that there's concordance between the communities where the nonprofit sectors are working and where the community leaders of color are coming from, and how to cultivate the further development of leadership throughout our communities, including the acknowledged leaders as well.
Absolutely. Those are all really important roles.
Thank you.
And what opportunities do you see for infrastructure providers to lead the social sector toward greater well-being?
I'm so glad you asked about that. You know, there really has been so many issues about burnout between COVID and these kind of rolling and constant challenges around going back to work, as well as the racial reckoning. there are so many pressures on leaders in the social sector and in communities that are engaged with social sector organizations. And so we know that a lot of leaders and staff are experiencing burnout, not only because of these massive changes that are happening, but also because of the inequities and disparities that pre-existed COVID and this moment in time. So we really need to support their well-being. In fact, I was just talking to a colleague at a foundation where they're starting to think about supporting and funding well-being retreats for leaders in the social sector, which I think is so needed. Infrastructure providers can help by offering services themselves that promote well-being, such as retreats or other opportunities to build meaningful relationships, training on how to handle change and how to handle trauma, and then training on managing the generational tensions and other internal conflicts that have been happening in a lot of organizations. Infrastructure providers can also advocate for funders to make well-being services available to everyone in the social sector, including by ensuring that organizations have enough funding to pay their staff living wages, as well as offer a wide range of benefits, including flexible work environments, paid time off, and healthcare. So there's lots of different ways that the social sector can really help to address well-being, whether it's within a social sector organization, whether it's by the funders, or whether it's these bridging infrastructure providers as well.
Great, thank you. And it's really wonderful to hear that organizations and funders are starting to think of ways that they can help support the well-being of the social sector, because as you said, it's very much needed.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that's really revealed itself in the last 3 years, especially with COVID and quarantining and the isolation, is this question of everything we assumed was how it had to be is no longer a valid assumption. You know, do we need to be in the office 5 days a week? Do we need to be, structuring work in ways that we did before? And I think there really is an opportunity to rethink this, and for funders to be more flexible, for the social sector organizations to also rethink that, and then for infrastructure providers to help be partners in that thought process.
Yes, I completely agree. Thank you so much, Kathy, for joining me for this Spark Talk. Thank you so much for To Change Philanthropy for inviting us to do this Spark Talk. And thank you so much to the audience for tuning in. I'm going to share my screen again briefly because it has our contact information if you'd like to get in touch with me or Kathy. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. This was a lot of fun. Thanks so much.